And if you take our four cardinal aspects and align them to the arrows of a compass, then that makes four quadrants. And I have found four definitions of value that correlate with each of these four quadrants. Existential value is determined from existence. Simply by existing, it proffers a certain amount of value. Our founding fathers knew this principle all too well. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. This staunch statement that begins the historical document that arguably marks the beginning of this great nation, the Declaration of Independence, the Founding Fathers measured humanity's value, or inalienable right, to include life. Why? Because it was endowed to us by our Creator. It was granted us at the instant of our existence. Because we exist, we hold value and have a right to life. Another way to express existential value is to consider that even for us to observe something, we must hold a measure of value to it to even register that it exists. If you're considering the color scheme on the screen, then you first had to place value on it to such an extent that you deemed it profitable to consider it for as long as you have. Let me put a caveat here, because some philosophers take this too far. This is not to say that our perception is what gives it value, or its existence, or any whatnot shenanigans. It has innate value not because we perceive it, but we perceive it because of its innate value and existence. If you want proof of this, all you have to do is look at it from a slightly different perspective. Even if we do not perceive it, that does not mean it does not exist or have innate value. I have never seen the Gobi Desert. That does not mean it does not exist. I have never seen an electron of an atom. That does not mean it does not have value. We can perceive things because those things have value. Our perception does not create the value of those things we observe. Further evidence that objects have existential value is object permanence, something we learn at a very young age. In line with what we discussed, all humans learn very quickly as young infants that just because mommy left the room, that does not mean mommy ceased to exist. The object of value, in this case mommy, is independent of the observer, the baby, which gives rise to the fact that the object exists independent and thus has a value external to the observer. Existential value is both internal and stable. No external circumstances change the value of an object's existence, and that value is derived from the object's existing in the first place. Thus, this definition belongs in the northwest quadrant of our compass. Utilitarian comes from the word utility, which is another way of saying function or purpose. Utilitarian value comes directly from the use or benefit the item has in fulfilling a certain purpose or function. A car's utility is to transport an object from one point to another. A toaster's utility is to toast bread. This value is internal, for the skill, talent, or function of the item stems from its very own ability. It is in flux, however, because its usefulness all depends upon the circumstance in which it is found. For instance, the internal value of a crowbar makes it very valuable when attempting to pull up floorboards. However, if I am attempting to change the batteries inside my stereo, the value of the crowbar goes down drastically. In fact, it may go into the negatives if I use my crowbar on my stereo. Chances are I will not be able to fix the damages. The screwdriver would have a high utilitarian value in that circumstance, while it would likewise have a very low utilitarian value in pulling up floorboards. Thus, although utilitarian value is internal, it remains in flux, depending upon the external circumstances. Thus, this definition belongs in the northeast quadrant of our compass. These definitions are not completely independent of each other. There's always a lot of interconnectedness between the four different definitions, two of which we've discussed so far. A good example of the interrelatedness between existential and utilitarian definitions is what I call potential value. Potential value is the utilitarian value that an object potentially has for future issues. The existence of the utility provides value, even if the item is not immediately in use. A great example would be items such as flashlights or umbrellas. Two items that are only used in very special and specific situations, and yet can be found in nearly every household. Even if it is not in use at the moment, it has great value, potential value, should a situation arise in which it is needed. Sentimental value is the third definition, and is perhaps the most contradictory of the value systems. Sentimental value is purely subjective, based upon the emotional value placed upon it by the individual. As such, one object may and typically holds great value to one person and little to no value to most other people. A childhood toy, a teddy bear, a blankie, or a precious memento. Sentimental value can be placed on the most common to the most rare of items. It matters not what it is, but nearly every human on the planet attaches sentimental value to certain things. Sentimental value is the most subjective of the values, and perhaps the most fickle. Despite it being fickle and subjective, drastically changing from person to person, the contradictory nature of sentimental value is that it is actually considered stable. As mentioned earlier in this video, stable value does not mean that it does not change, but it is not directly affected by external circumstances. So although the value is determined externally from the individual who has a sentimental attachment to it, that sentimental value does not change from altering circumstances. Only the source of that attachment, the individual whom holds it, can in any way alter the value of that sentiment. Thus, although it sounds contradictory, sentimental value is very stable, unchanging unless the individual who holds it, from which the value derives itself from, decides to change it. But never can it be changed by any external circumstances outside that individual. Sentimental value, thus, would fit within the southwestern quadrant of our compass. Perhaps the easiest definition to determine and to understand is the economic value. It is also likely the most arbitrary value there is as well. Economic value includes the financial price of items, added fees, insurances, interest percentages, and even such things as manual fees, mechanical and technical costs, among other such considerations. Financial systems are, by their nature, arbitrary. They're based around mutually agreed social values that is equivalent to a certain external value. Supply and demand, the stock market, inflation, taxes, and many other external circumstances can all have an effect on the economic value of an object. Even time can have an effect. Consider the value of this car. Any car devalues by 20% after the first year of ownership, and 15% for every year after that. The interesting thing about economic value is that external value tends to be based upon internal value. In the system of supply and demand, demand stems from a need which the item fulfills, which provides a utilitarian value, which is internal in nature, and thus we see yet again the interconnectedness of the values. Economic value finds itself through arbitrary monetary concepts, and thus it's not only just an external value, but one that is in constant flux depending upon external circumstances. It thus belongs in the southeast quadrant of our compass, and here we have all four definitions in their corresponding locations.